The art of the empty account. How to make millions disappear instantly. The hook. First 30 seconds. It was 17 a.m. on a Tuesday when the alarm finally screamed not a sound of digital failure, but the sound of reality collapsing. $72 million. Gone. Not moved, not misfiled, but erased from the ledger, as if the digits themselves had dissolved into the ether. How does that much wealth, the security of generations, evaporate in the span of a single silent weekend? The official audit would later confirm the impossible. The accounts were not compromised. They were empty. And the chilling twist? The person who vanished the money never touched a keyboard inside the building. They orchestrated the greatest digital heist from a coffee shop 3,000 miles away, using nothing more than the public records everyone else ignores. Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Machine. Backstory. This begins not with a bang but with the slow, grinding realization of routine. For months, the subject had moved like a shadow through the financial district's periphery. Not an employee, not a consultant, but a ghost who studied the habits of the giants. The way the light fell across the mahogany desks just before midnight. The precise moment the night security made their slowest pass through the server wing. The critical weakness wasn't in the encryption, it was in the assumption of human frailty. Every system, no matter how robust, relies on someone verifying the input. That verification process, the small, almost invisible step of human trust, became the primary target. The acquisition of access credentials wasn't the difficult part. Those were bought, traded, or simply observed over weeks of patient digital eavesdropping. The real art was making those credentials look not just valid, but expected. The system needed to believe the transfer request was coming from the inside, authorized by someone who was currently filing paperwork in the adjacent building. The transaction required 3 distinct layers of authorization, all scheduled to occur sequentially, separated by precisely calculated delays that mimicked natural human processing time. The first authorization clicked into place at 11:48 p.m. Friday. A brief, almost imperceptible spike in network traffic, absorbed instantly by the ambient noise of nightly backups. Then silence. The world assumed everything was locked down for the weekend. Chapter 2. The Slow Leak. The initial move was deliberately small. A mere $20,000 slipped out, channeled through a series of shell corporations established months prior in jurisdictions famous for their indifference to source verification. This wasn't greed, it was a stress test. If that $20,000 triggered an alert, the entire operation would abort. But the systems, designed to catch large, sudden intrusions, swallowed the small amount whole, filing it under routine interdepartmental reconciliation. The small victory was exhilarating, a faint hum beneath the surface of the quiet city. Now came the scaling. The next transfer 3 hours later was $5 million. This required a different approach. It couldn't look like an external drain, it had to look like an internal reallocation error. The routing path was complex, bouncing through a chain of seemingly legitimate but ultimately defunct holding companies based in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. The key was the memo line. Every transfer had a corresponding narrative explaining why the funds were moved. $5 million was labeled simply Q4 contingency adjustment pending regulatory review. The jargon was the shield. It implied bureaucracy, complexity, and most importantly, authority. The system flagged the movement only briefly, confirming the internal authorization codes matched the request, and passed it along. The electronic trail, thick with legitimate-sounding documentation, was designed to discourage immediate human review. Who wants to wade through 300 pages of fake regulatory filings at 2 a.m. on a Saturday? Chapter 3. The Illusion of Depth. The goal was not just to move the money, but to ensure that when the discovery was finally made, there would be no clear entry point left to trace. This necessitated the creation of phantom liabilities. While the real money was being siphoned off, secondary processes were initiated to create the appearance of deep, complex financial activity within the originating accounts. Millions were routed back and forth between dummy accounts, creating high transaction volume that overwhelmed automated monitoring software. It was noise layered upon noise, a financial smokescreen designed to confuse forensics. Imagine a library where every single shelf is suddenly filled with thousands of books, all open to random pages. When investigators arrived, they wouldn't see the missing 7 million. They would see 70 million engaged in frantic, meaningless motion. The subject, miles away, monitored this digital chaos with detached precision, feeling the slow, building pressure of time. Each successful transfer provided another piece of the puzzle, a confirmation that the next larger sum would also be absorbed. The next target was the largest single chunk, $40 million. earmarked for a supposed acquisition in Singapore. This required the most delicate lie of all, the simulation of a senior executive's authenticated digital signature, achieved not by cracking the private key, but by exploiting a known, rarely patched vulnerability in the legacy VPN software still running on the executive's rarely used home office terminal. The subject hadn't needed to break in. They simply needed to wait for the executive to forget to log out properly before leaving for vacation. Chapter 4. The ticking clock. By dawn on Saturday, the total extraction stood at 55 million. The subject felt a tremor of panic. The schedule was tight. By Monday morning, the internal reconciliation team would begin their weekly review, and the phantom liabilities would start looking less like movement and more like leakage. There were still 17 million left to secure. This final tranche had to be the fastest, the most direct, because there was no time left for complex shell games. This was pure, brute force digital tunneling. The funds were broken down into thousands of microtransactions, each small enough to pass under standard fraud detection thresholds, 100,000 here, 50,000 there, routed directly to digital wallets already established across half a dozen decentralized exchanges. The system registered these as small, high-frequency trading profits generated by an automated arbitrage bot. The sheer volume of these tiny digital whispers created a massive, nearly unreadable data stream. The sound of rapid-fire keyboard input, though physically distant, echoed in the subject's mind, a relentless percussion driving the final phase. The network barely flickered. 17 million vanished in under 90 minutes, atomized across the global digital landscape, untraceable the moment the final exchange confirmed receipt. The reveal. The art of the empty account. And that brings us back to 3:17 a.m. Tuesday, the moment the official audit flagged the $72 million discrepancy. The crucial question remains: how did they make it disappear so completely without leaving a digital corpse? The answer is the final, most elegant piece of the puzzle, the knowledge gap that separates a common thief from an artist of disappearance. The subject never deleted the records of the transfers. They didn't wipe the servers. That would have left a scream in the system logs. Instead, the final, calculated act was to upload a sophisticated data script that reclassified the $72 million. It didn't move the funds to an offshore account. It moved the liability to an entirely different, legitimate, but already bankrupt holding company that was undergoing a forced liquidation, overseen by a specific, obscure international maritime law firm. Legally, financially, and digitally, the money was still accounted for. It was merely classified as an unrecoverable debt owed by a company the firm already knew was worthless. The funds weren't stolen. They were legally assigned to a debt collector that couldn't exist. When investigators dug into the original ledger, they saw $72 million documented, allocated, and officially designated as lost to insolvency. No trace of digital theft, just the cold, hard finality of paperwork. The millions hadn't vanished into the night. They had been perfectly filed away into the graveyard of global finance, leaving behind only the echoing silence of empty accounts and the terrifying realization that sometimes the most secure vault is the one built out of bureaucracy. The subject, meanwhile, was already tracing their new, untraceable assets through a network far less concerned with paper trails.